Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 354 of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, where I'm proud to offer my new service offering, the Compliance Alliance. The Compliance Alliance is a three-step process to ramp up your sales in the product and services area of compliance. It provides you a boot camp for your ELT or senior sales team, a 1-month sponsorship of my seminal podcast, a 1-month to more effective compliance program, and follow-up sales training. For more information, contact me, Tom Fox. Today I have with me back Vin DiCianni. He is the president and founder of Affiliated Monitors. We discussed the recent strategic alliance announcement between Affiliated Monitor and RS Legal, a premier UK white-collar and fraud boutique. We discussed the strengths that each party brings to the new business venture and what they hope to achieve. But we really use this new strategic alliance to discuss how companies can take a more proactive approach to addressing ethics and compliance deficiencies comprehensively and through the efforts of an independent monitor. When an independent monitor approach is used, there's a much greater likelihood that a successful outcome and improved practices can be achieved. If you've been following my podcast for some time, you know that I've been talking about the evolution of best practices compliance programs, continually moving away from the simple paper program articulated by some. With the release of the Department of Justice's Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Programs in February, you really need to think about how your program's designed and ask questions about it. The proactive use of a monitor is a key innovation in this path. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello again, this is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back again for another episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Today I have back with me Vin DiCianni, the president of Affiliated Monitors. Affiliated Monitors has recently announced a strategic alliance with RS Legal. And I found this, it's a UK firm, and I found this a very interesting development in the monitor and corporate integrity world. So I asked Vin if he might come back on the podcast and explain this, what it brings to the table, and how this will help both Affiliated Monitors, RS Legal, but more importantly, the compliance community to extend its reach on a global basis. So with that somewhat long-winded introduction, Vin, welcome, and thanks for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be back.
So Vin, this week, or on October 6th, I saw a press release which said that Affiliated Monitors had formed a strategic alliance with RS Legal Strategy Limited, a UK QC-led legal one-stop shop for white-collar crime and fraud boutique. And I was wondering, for the members of our audience who are not familiar with RS Legal, what they do, and how then the strategic alliance is going to work with Affiliated Monitors.
Sure. So the folks at RS Legal are barristers out of the UK. The two fellows that we've been working with most closely are Jason Sugarman and Mark Rainsford. They are QC, and they have a sort of a new approach, if you will, to the work that a barrister can do in Great Britain, and that is that they can now do some consulting work, which they were sort of restricted in doing before. And the vision that Mark and Jason have established in creating RS Legal Strategy is to be a sort of a resource for counsel who are working on matters before the Serious Fraud Office, or for companies that have matters where they might be under an investigation or have gotten some kind of notice or some type of, some hotline complaints or something where that potentially could occur. And so the work that RS Legal Strategy is doing and is planning on doing in greater depth is to sort of be a resource for attorneys and companies to sort of navigate through the SFO process with a mindset of hopefully reaching a resolution in which the company can make improvements, and that's where affiliated comes in, which I'll talk about in a minute. But just to be able to sort of posture the case in a way that is cooperative with the SFO in a positive way, and then perhaps make some changes in order to address some of the deficiencies that either internal investigation has uncovered or that the company has been put on notice about. In a way that it's very different thinking, and it's sort of what's going on now in the U.S. with DOJ, where companies can come in and demonstrate, that they've taken some effective corrective action, so as to avoid a deferred prosecution agreement, or if appropriate, to enter into a deferred prosecution agreement as opposed to a full-blown prosecution. So RS Legal Strategies is the one group that is looking to be a resource for working with those kind of companies. The link with affiliated is, and this is coming from Mark and Jason at RS Legal Strategy, is to use affiliated's work as a consultant in ethics and compliance programs and assessment of programs that we've talked with you about previously, as an arm or a part of this corrective action plan, so that the company, through a third party, an independent, can put together an action plan, including maybe improvements or maybe a deeper assessment of their compliance and ethics program and their culture and what have you, as a full package. So you then bring that to the SFO or other agencies or even DOJ, where you now have a well-established process or program, if you will, for improvement. Through, again, for us, that the changes that they're making are real and they're effective, and they'll be ongoing. So that's sort of the connection.
So then one of the things that intrigued me about this strategic alliance is we've seen really over the past 18 months an uptick in monitors for companies headquartered outside of the United States. Certainly in the VimpelCom case, we did not see one in Telia, but we see the Department of Justice placing monitors on companies outside the United States. Does this new development or this continued development really, and then now overlaid with the strategic alliance by affiliated monitors and RS Legal, give you the opportunity to maybe expand your monitor reach outside the United States as well?
It very much does. Again, that for us as affiliated, we are seeing much more activity on the international side of things. And I think you're spot on when you say that's occurring. And that's, not just DOJ looking at companies outside of the U.S., but I think, through the SFO, they are looking at companies that have greater reach outside of Great Britain, and they might be companies doing work in Great Britain or aligned or what have you. And so for affiliated, to have a team of folks from Great Britain, including, as I said, Mark and Jason. One of the other folks that they have is a retired judge, Jeffrey Rivlin, who we very much see as joining the affiliated monitors, monitoring team to expand our reach into Europe and then beyond. So yes, very much our thinking is with that type of activity that you had noted, there's going to be many more opportunities for that type of work.
So I'm certainly aware of Affiliated's role as corporate monitors. I'm certainly aware of your role in proactive compliance. I'm not as aware of the role that Affiliated might have based upon your and Eric's sort of background before you guys got together in Affiliated. But you both did investigations for the government, if I recall correctly. And if so, does that sort of experience that you guys bring to the table really lend itself to the type of work that I see RS Legal does in terms of overall business and or financial crime?
It very much does. When we started Affiliated 15 years ago, it came from some of my experience that I had as an assistant attorney general in Massachusetts. Eric bringing his experience as an IG in investigations on the financial side of things or on the sort of fraud in procurement and or false claims area. Don Stern from Affiliated certainly has a wealth of experience in government investigations. And then Rod Brandon, who joined us from the Suspension and Debarment Office of the Air Force, we all have that type of experience. That type of experience is very similar to what Mark Rainsford and Jason Sugarman have in their experience as barristers handling, UK bribery cases or other serious fraud matters before the SFO. That type of government experience is I think, very significant in understanding, what the government is looking for in terms of sort of the steps that a company can take to perhaps rectify problems that have occurred in companies, but more importantly, in just addressing some of the behaviors that led to the problems, that they're now confronted with. For example, a lot of times what we see in cases in the U.S. and now internationally is just sometimes it's bad controls. Sometimes they just don't have good FCPA controls in place, or they have really good FCPA controls in place, but they're not very effective, in the ground or on the ground rather, or in the field. So the experience that we have at Affiliated and now with the RS Legal Strategy folks is to be able to develop an understanding of, number one, are the controls effective? Number two, are they actually being, used by companies? Mark and Jason at RS Legal really do have that same depth of understanding that we have, and that's why it was sort of a natural fit for us.
So I'm obviously intrigued by the proactive side of affiliated monitors and how this strategic alliance will help that. But I wanted to really stick with the legal part for a minute, because the other thing that struck me, Vin, is that with the increased cooperation between international enforcement agencies, and I'll point to the Telia case, which listed 17 different countries as participating with the Department of Justice and SEC in the investigative phase of that case. It seems to me that having not only competent but really expert counsel and advisors in the country where you may be dealing with regulators outside the U.S. is going to be a critical step going forward, and that affiliated monitors through this strategic alliance could bring that type of expertise to a client, where if a company was subject to the Serious Fraud Office, or subject to the Bribery Act, and the SFO was investigating, you could have appropriate counsel in London. Certainly here in the United States, affiliated monitors could work with whatever regulators might be looking at a company, from DOJ, SEC, DOD, or you name the alphabet agency. And it seems like to me that you really expanded that type of footprint as well.
Very much so. Again, that was the vision that we had when we decided to link up. There was an event out in London this week, which was the ABA White Collar International Group met, and some of the speakers were from DOJ and from the SFO, and it's just very interesting. One of my colleagues, Don Stern, was there, and Mark and Jason participated as well. Don was on one of the panels, and the conversation I'm hearing from them is this sort of conundrum that you've identified, and that is, a matter is brought in the U.S. against the company from the UK or from France or somewhere else, And so the Department of Justice is taking action, but the SFO in London might be looking at it, or the Justice the Division in France might also be looking at it. And the sort of the quandary is, you might resolve the matter with DOJ, but it doesn't necessarily resolve the other matters that are percolating out there. And I think, from David Green's speaking there this week, you get the sense that there is a level of cooperation between the SFO and DOJ that is very strong. And I think that that bodes very well for what you just described as to what we're trying to do. I think it's still going to take some time for other, officials in other countries to sort of develop that type of relationship and trust, between the agencies in terms of the level of investigation and or, what they're actually looking at and trying to resolve things. But, a global resolution of a matter really serves everybody. As opposed to having a DOJ matter get resolved and then you've got still an open action in 6 other countries. So if what we're doing here can help bring some type of global resolution, Tom, and again that would be a nice resolution, I think, for companies because of the uncertainty of an ongoing action or what have you, but in a way that is effective, can be demonstrated that they've actually done something that makes a change, that addresses, with transparency changes that they've undertaken and can give confidence to DOJ, the SFO, and other, the French justice authorities. That's a win for everyone. And so, yes, that is the goal here. I don't know if we'll ever achieve it, but it is something that we are very much considering.
Now let me turn to the thing that frankly excites me the most about affiliated monitors and what you guys can really bring to the table is on the proactive side, where you would go in and help a company assess culture, help them really beyond the controls part, help them understand how that it does start not only from the top, but it drives through the entire organization, whether you call that values, whether you call that ethics, whether you call that culture, but having that right message all the way through the organization and reinforcing that message through appropriate use of controls. How does this strategic alliance really help you in what I find to be one of the most exciting initiatives of affiliated monitors at this point?
So you've heard us talk about the fact that monitoring oftentimes involves looking at an ethics and compliance program, conflicts of interest, codes of conduct, and the effectiveness of those programs, and then reporting the findings that you make to the Department of Justice or other government agencies that have put in place the monitor. The assessment work that we do takes sort of the same criteria, but on the consultative side. And so, for companies that are not necessarily, facing, suspension or, some type of criminal action or even being looked at for purposes of whether or not they are a trusted contractor, to have an independent come in and do that type of assessment, it really sort of creates, as I talked about, some better controls, some more an understanding of whether or not those controls are effective, and can sort of lead to this culture of compliance and stronger ethical adherence. Not a lot of companies, are willing to invest, and this is a conversation we've had before with you. They're not willing to invest upfront into, looking at themselves that carefully, and they're very comfortable having a compliance program that they can show to the world that they have one, but they're not necessarily willing to invest in how effective those programs are, or whether or not the compliance team is sufficiently resourced to be able to do the intended job of reaching thousands of employees around the world, and so in headquarters, they have a strong ethics and compliance program, but not necessarily in the field. What we're trying to do here through this sort of consulting kind of effort is to encourage companies to take that step, because in the end, it's going to save the company, significant heartache and dollar and reputational damage that can occur and those kinds of things. We're all very familiar with what's going on now with in New York with Weinstein, right? That type of behavior and that goes on. It's very much cultural, So yes, it's individual behavior, but it's cultural. And to have a company where people are not afraid to speak up, not afraid to say something because they're going to be retaliated against, and to have an effective, compliance team that will take those matters seriously and be able to address them. That's something that's hard to get companies to do. I think by the effort that we're making, and with RS Legal Strategies, that's really our goal, is to get companies to actually take that initiative up front rather than waiting, for the shoe to drop.
I'm really glad you brought up the Harvey Weinstein case, because I think compliance professionals have woken up today, or perhaps maybe even yesterday, to realize sexual harassment is compliance, and that it's all compliance, and it's all ethical culture, and it's all values. And if you don't have a handle on something which you may think is as far away from anti-corruption compliance as sexual harassment could be, you may find yourself, your company, going into receivership because the CEOs had to leave. So that's a great example, and I hope we can build upon that in the future. Well, then, unfortunately, we're near the. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
No.
Go ahead. I just wanted to make a point about that, because we've worked with a couple of companies, in the past 15 years, where the owner of the entity was involved in behaviors like that. Maybe not as drastic and not as predatory, but certainly behaviors that were questionable. And they have staff around them who know what's going on, but are terrified. They almost can't speak. Because number one, it's their job. They might have a mortgage. They might have kids in school, and they can't really speak up, and they really are terrified. And then when we come in, it's like giving them the opportunity to speak up for the first time. It's almost like a confessional, right? They get to talk and they get to explain what's going on, and it's a catharsis for them. Creating that type of environment is something that every company needs to strive for, right? And so it's a hard thing to do, but I think you should address that in greater depth, because it's very real in companies. Sometimes, we talk, always about corruption and those kinds of things. But, for many people on the ground, it's what they immediately see. And that may be something in terms of harassment or improper behaviors that really affect them more, directly than at the top where there might be corruption. So it's a really good topic for you to consider.
Well, Ben, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but this has been a really fascinating interview, and I really look forward to seeing what both Affiliated Monitors and RS Legal can do going forward. I've been visiting with Vin DiCianni, the president and founder of Affiliated Monitors, about the very exciting announcement of the strategic alliance formed by Affiliated Monitors with RS Legal Strategy Limited in the United Kingdom. Vin, thanks very much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out even further to a greater audience for this, the most senior podcast in compliance. Also, please check out any of my other podcasts in the podcast network, including Across the Board, a podcast on boards of directors, 12 O'Clock High, a podcast on business leadership, Compliance Report International Edition, which takes a look at international issues, Compliance Into the Weeds, with Matt Kelly, where we take a deep dive into a compliance or compliance-related topic. Everything Compliance, the only roundtable podcast in compliance. Once again, this is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report, and I hope you will join me next week for another episode.